For 44 years, Varsity Ford in Ann Arbor has been more than just a dealership. We're a family, proudly serving yours. As one of the top volume Ford dealers in the world, we're proof that when you treat people right, they come back, generation after generation. And now we make it easier than ever with complimentary pickup and delivery for both sales and service. So you can buy or service your Ford without leaving home. Varsity Ford, driven by family, built on tradition.
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Varsity Ford of Ann Arbor. And as always, I'm your host, Pistons beat writer at the Detroit News, Coty M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on all your social media platforms at Coty Davis _24. Once again, that's Coty, COTY DAVIS _24. And of course, as always, I'm here with my co-host, Tarohn Finley. Tarohn, what's going on, my guy?
What's going on with you, Coty? And I'm Tarohn Finley. Make sure you guys follow me on all social media platforms at Tarohn Finley, TAROHNFINLEY. Once again, TAROHNFINLEY. And as always, I'm ready to talk Pistons with you, Coty.
Yes, sir. And look, at this point, we are over halfway through, not halfway, but we are a quarter way through the 2025-2026 campaign. And the Pistons are sitting at the top of the Eastern Conference still with a 21-5 record. And we are recording this podcast a day after the Pistons went inside Boston and took a 112-105 win over the Celtics. It was a game in which, the Pistons, they started off a little bit slow, especially when the Celtics started to exploit that zone defense. However, they were able to pick it up in the second half, led by Cade Cunningham and that bench unit. And it's part of the reason why we're sitting here today looking at the Pistons as championship contenders. However, before we get into that and kind of showcase why that game proved that why the Pistons are a legit threat, I had an opportunity to catch up with NBC and Peacock NBA play-by-play broadcaster Noah Eagle as he discussed why the Pistons are championship contenders in this year's season.
Conference. I know coming into the season, I don't want to speak for you, but coming into the season, I'm pretty sure you had some expectations about the Pistons. But how surprising has it been just to see what the Pistons have been able to do through the first quarter of the season?
I don't know if I would say it's crazy surprising. Obviously, the win streak was somewhat surprising just because that doesn't happen very often in the NBA, and certainly it hasn't really happened in Pistons history like that. So that, you could argue, was a bit of a surprise to win that many games consecutively. But I think I expected the team to take a step forward just because I think we've seen it across the NBA, especially the last couple of years, of these young teams that take a step and make the playoffs and get that experience and then get heartbroken in many ways in the playoffs, come back stronger. Their younger guys just get better. Cade Cunningham has become an MVP level player. Jalen Duren's become an all-star legitimately this year. And then you've got guys like Asar, who's, just continuing to develop. And now you bring in a Duncan Robinson who fits what they need as a shooter. You bring in a Karis LeVert, who's a legitimate vet in this league. And then I guess the surprising ones are guys like, Dennis Jenkins and the way that he's played this year and playing big minutes in big moments and winning basketball. That's the type of stuff you need. But I just think we've seen it. You think about Oklahoma City. They go from lottery team every year to playing their way in to eventually making the playoffs as the top seed in the West. To now last year winning a title. You see the development of their young pieces. I think Houston Rockets, a similar type of vibe where they had this mix with a lot of youth and then they brought in a couple veterans to help that youth along, and now we're seeing what they look like this year as they try to solidify their team. The San Antonio Spurs are in a very similar time, aspect of where their development looks like, where for years they've been developing this young talent. Now they're ready to compete. So I just think that the Pistons are on that trajectory, which we've seen in the NBA, of young guys continuing to get better. And so the expectation was that they would get better, and they have.
Gotcha. And I know you been around the game for an extremely long time, especially given your father. And I know
Hmm.
that, you had an opportunity to really like watch, see, be around a lot of championship contending teams. One thing about the Pistons, they believe that they have all the intangibles as of right now to go out there and compete for that Larry O'Brien trophy come, April, May, and potentially in June. When you take a look at the Pistons as of right now, given everything, given your experience with, being around championship contending teams, are there any qualities, any attributes that you see in this version of the Pistons when you compare it to other teams, whether it could be like a Oklahoma City, like you just mentioned, or let's say, other championship teams like Golden State,
Sure.
Boston, throughout the years over these last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think every team and every even championship team has their own identity.
Mm-hmm.
But the Pistons, to me, to answer your question, they do have some of those imperative qualities to win. One of those is having a closer. You need that guy, and Kate Cunningham has proven, even when he's not at his best, he's not having his best night. When
Mm-hmm.
winning time comes, he rises to the occasion. So the fact that you've got someone like that already puts you in position to win just about any night, and we've seen that this season. The toughness aspect to me is really what their calling card is. You think about those championship Pistons teams, whether it's from the 90s or in 2004, toughness, that's what stuck out. That's what really felt like it was a difference maker for them. The '04 team didn't necessarily have the super duper duper stars, and I know they've got guys in the Hall of Fame, but they played tough, branded basketball. The Bad Boys, they're nicknamed the Bad Boys for a reason. This team has that toughness. I think that Duran, and then obviously Isaiah Stewart when he's on the floor, there's toughness there. Asar Thompson, he's tough. And Kate Cunningham, he just is Detroit to me. He fits perfectly for what Detroit is. And so you start to put all those pieces together and mix it around, and you get this product. So to me, those are the two qualities that they have that will guide them. And if they are going to achieve what they hope to achieve, those are going to be the two qualities that they're going to need to rely on.
Gotcha. And how impressed have you been, whether it's this year or going back to last year, just looking at Coach JB Bickerstaff? I know he is a guy that's been around the league for a long time, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, given the fact that he took over the Houston Rockets as an interim back in that
Yeah.
15-16 season. I mean, this is basically like his 10th year being a head coach in the year, being a head coach in this league. What are your thoughts about Coach JB Bickerstaff?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's in many ways very similar to, you brought up me being around my dad and being around the NBA a long time. I'd say
Yeah.
for JB, it's the same deal, right? You got to see it from such a young age, and really growing up with being around Bernie, and Bernie at being a head coach now. Let's see, he was in Seattle, Denver, Washington, Charlotte, and then he was an advisor in Cleveland. But he was in a number of stops, and JB in his own right has been, to your point, a head coach now in a number of stops. And I think that you just think about the amount of knowledge that he's accrued over the years, whether it was as a kid being around and just absorbing it through osmosis, not even sitting down and saying, hey, what do you do this? Just watching, just seeing it. And that is huge. That's a huge advantage, to be honest. You just get a head start in that sense. And then now you look at his own career and the different places he's been, the different styles that his teams have had, and going from a Cleveland team that played a certain way to now a Detroit team that plays this way, or you go back to his time in Memphis and what they looked like when he was both an assistant and then the head coach. You mentioned the interim job in Houston. That actually probably is the best way to kind of get thrown into the fire, because it's exactly that. You get thrown in. And so most guys that first year, your head is spinning. Now, when he got his full-time opportunity, he kind of knew what to expect. So I think that all of those experience play such a factor into the coach that he's become now. But he's the perfect fit for what this team requires. He has the perfect voice for what they look to. You see them, they respect him. They appreciate his wisdom. They appreciate his perspective. And that's critical, especially when you have a young team and they're mixed well. And I thought last year bringing in veterans the way that they did was huge, and doing more of the same this year, keeping Tobias Harris there, and then bringing in Duncan Robinson, Karis LeVert. These are guys that have played, and obviously Karis played for JB before, so he knows what to expect. But they're guys that have played a lot of basketball and know what the NBA life is like. And for these younger players, not necessarily the K's of the world, but you start thinking about the, Ron Hollands of the world, and Asar, who's still only in year 3, and Jalen Duren, who's still incredibly young just by his own age.
Yeah.
It's important to have that influence. Like a Javonte Green to me is such a shrewd addition to this team. And I think JB respects that and knows how to utilize that. And so it's been a really seamless fit between Bickerstaff and the Pistons over the last 2 years.
Last question on my end. When you take a look at the Pistons, once again, we're a quarter way done with the season, and this is, still a lot of basketball left to be played. And as you know, things could change in a heartbeat, whether good or bad, happy or sad. When you take a look at the Pistons through the first quarter of the season, are there any attributes, any intangibles about the team that make you say if they could fix this, then they would definitely have a chance to compete, not just in the Eastern Conference, but for that Larry O'Brien Trophy in June?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I almost feel like in the modern NBA, you can't have enough shooting. And we've seen, Duncan Robinson is doing his job. He's shooting 40% from 3. He's taking almost 8 of them per game. That's what they're paying him to do. So he's fulfilled that. Tobias Harris is still shooting 38% from 3, and he's taking about 5 of them per game. So he's fulfilling his side of it. Isaiah Stewart's volume isn't high, but he's making them at a high clip. But I just look around, Karis LeVert's been making it. I just feel like if you could add one more sniper, it just gives you a little bit more insurance that when some other guys maybe aren't making shots, you can bring somebody off the bench. And I just think about a lot of the teams that have won over the last couple of seasons. Oklahoma City last year may be a little different because of the way that they play, but they still have snipers. I mean, Isaiah Joe is a guy who can come in and he can make 5 threes, and you look back up and go, what happened? And Aaron Wiggins has turned himself into that level shooter, and Lou Dort's turned himself into a 40% three-point shooter, and Caruso makes timely threes. I think that's important. Boston, obviously, was the extreme, where 2 years ago they won the title because they just shot and made way more threes than anybody. I think about Denver when they won the title. Michael Porter Jr. for them was an absolute laser from the outside, and they had enough shooting around him, and Jokic just creates open opportunities for everybody. And then obviously Golden State is kind of the template that everybody still looks after in terms of building your dynasty, and they had 2 of the greatest shooters in the history of the game, surrounded by other shooters. And so I just think that you can never have enough, and even just teams that have made long runs. I can use the Miami Heat just because Duncan was there, but they had Duncan Robinson, Max Strus, Gabe Vincent. Like, these guys were known commodities from three-point territory. And so to me, that's like the one thing that if I'm looking at this team, I'm saying, okay, if they could add one more guy that they can just rely on to be a 40+% three-point shooter, I think that it just gives them a little bit more insurance down the stretch.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast. Once again, that was Noah Eagle, NBA play-by-play broadcaster for NBC and Peacock. Great interview, a lot of great insight. I had an opportunity once again to speak to him, ironically, about a day or so before he was on the broadcasting call for Peacock when the Pistons beat the Celtics, and I thought that interview was great timing, Tarohn, because everything that he said in that interview was everything that we saw the Detroit Pistons do in their victory over the Celtics. Before I give my thoughts, what were your biggest takeaway, whether it was from the interview or from what we saw against the Pistons' victory against the Celtics?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Noah said was very spot on. He talked about the identity of this team, the toughness. We've seen Isaiah Stewart get into it a little bit with Jaylen Brown, and the fact that I think this was their biggest win of the season, just because the fact that the Boston Celtics had beat them before. They beat the Celtics early on too, so it was tied up 1-1. And the fact that this just looked like a tough environment to play in. I was watching from home, but I can tell the atmosphere was just great. And Cade Cunningham, went out with 5 fouls late in the game. And the fact that they were still able to close this game on timely shots from him. And he basically kind of did it on his own along with guys on the bench like Caris LeVert, like we mentioned, people like that, against Jaylen Brown, who seemed like he was hitting everything, and Derek White, who was also heating up against the end. So I was just impressed. I thought this was a great, like I said, great victory against a team that won 10 of 13 before. I think they were the third seed going in, even though it's, it's still pretty early. But overall, I was just impressed. What were your thoughts about this game, Coty?
That this is the reason why the Pistons are championship contenders. And look, we could sit here and talk about the guy that's leading the way, Cade Cunningham. I mean, he finished the game with 32 points, shot a season high, 6 made triples, had 19 in the second half, and of course, like Noah just finished talking about, when it's winning time, he has the ability to step up when needed, and that's exactly what we saw in that game against the Celtics. However, I don't know if I would go as far as to say that this is their best win of the season, but it's definitely top 2, maybe top 3. And I say that because the one thing that I like most about this game was the fact that Cade, in the first half, he was basically on his, let's say, Michael Jackson bad tour. He was just solo at this point. Nobody was helping him, especially with the starting unit. However, this game did not fall in the Pistons' favor until you had guys coming off the bench like Caris LeVert, like Jaden Ivey, like a Javonte Green. When you had those guys like Ron Holland, when you had those guys basically stepping up when they was needed, especially, late third, especially early midway through the fourth quarter when Cade Cunningham did have to sit for some time because he picked up those 5 fouls. And the reason why I say I love that the most is because normally when that happens, you automatically fall to your number 2 player. Jalen Duren had arguably, if not his worst game of the season, right, finishing with 6 points and I think 3 rebounds, although he had 2 blocks and a steal. Okay, that's okay, but we're looking at a guy who's on the verge of his first All-Star selection, national broadcast in Boston. I mean, if you go out and get another double-double against this team, you all but solidify your All-Star spot. However, he didn't do that. It was just a bad night. But the fact that they literally had to find a way to lean upon other guys, and not saying that guys like Jaden Ivey, Caris LeVert, Javonte Green, Isaiah Stewart has not played a role in Pistons victories throughout this whole entire season, but it's when they needed them the most in Boston is what I like the most about them, especially when you had someone like a Javonte Green who, hit a clutch 3-point basket to kind of like hold off the Celtics when they went on their fourth quarter run. And then right after he hit that 3, he made a steal and had arguably, if not the best dunk of the season from the Pistons standpoint, when he had that one-hand dunk over, I think it was over Derek White. It's those moments like that. Those players are part of the reason why I look at the Pistons and say this is why they are a legitimate contender, not just in the Eastern Conference, but in the league. Is because you need multiple guys, especially off the bench, that could come up and help this team flourish, especially considering that they finished the game with 47 points coming off the bench.
Right. And I think that's really important. You mentioned those 47 bench points because, like you said, they came from like a Javonte Green, who, like you said, hit a clutch shot at the end. And that dunk was just got me, everyone off their seats for sure. And I thought Ivy, that was one of the most impressive games I've seen from him, not from a statistics perspective. I think he only hit like 1 of 7 from 3. So his shot wasn't falling.
But it was his impact.
It was his impact. Like you said, as a two-way player, he was aggressive on both ends, just looking to still attack, even though like I said, his shot wasn't falling. Caris LeVert had 13. Tobias Harris also had 13. So it just seemed like all around, this is the type of wins I want to see more out of the Pistons, which they can't help who they play on their schedule. They have to continue to dominate and beat teams like they did against Atlanta before this game. But if they can keep gutting out wins like this, I don't really see them losing like as, a top 3 seed in the East or anything like that. So this was, like I said, to me, their most impressive win. But Coty, you mentioned something earlier in the podcast that just really stood out to me, which was a lot of the teams they have been facing lately, like the Bucks. I think the Trailblazers try to do it in their matchup. They've been giving them a lot of those zone looks, especially early on, and they've been having to kind of try to shoot their way out of the zone or get into the zone and pass it out. Do you think that can be a problem for the Pistons, like later on, once they continue to have these big games or go against these playoff teams. How do you think they kind of can fix this problem? You know what I mean?
I think so. I think that could be the long, I don't want to say long detriment, but it definitely could be one of the biggest detriments that can deter this whole entire season. Because look, everyone knows it's fundamental basketball. Like you in order to break the zone, you got to prove that you can shoot. And like Noah said, outside of Duncan Robinson, yeah, you have guys like Tobias Harris. Yeah, Cade Cunningham just shot a season high 6 made triples. Jaden Ivey, as he tried to work his way back, he had proven that he was, an established 3-point shooter. But outside of Duncan Robinson, you really don't have another pure, reliable shooter that you can trust on this team. And I think that's part of the reason why, because this is a team that thrives with their mid-range. This is a team that thrives inside, especially when they're pounding the ball with Jalen Duren. Like, this is a team that can kill you from the inside, especially with the mid-range, but they have yet to prove that they are a solid 3-point shooting team. That's part of the reason why we've seen this team struggle against the zone throughout this whole entire season so far. I think the only time that they looked decent or beat the zone was in that win against the Milwaukee Bucks a few weeks ago. But once again, that was a game against the Milwaukee Bucks where they did not have Giannis Antetokounmpo. And even though that game ended up being a blowout, at one point in this game, it was a moment where the Pistons were struggling against the Bucks with the zone defense. And that came a couple days later after the Bucks beat them using that same defensive strategy. So I look at it from a standpoint, if you're struggling against the zone, against the Bucks, if you are in a close game against, I believe it was the Atlanta Hawks in the first half, right before they started blowing them out, they had switched over to a zone at one point. If you have moments where you're struggling against the zone against those teams, that's going to be very concerning when you start playing against teams like the New York Knicks, or let's say, for the sake of this argument, once the schedule really starts picking up later on in the season, when you're going up against, matter of fact, in a couple of weeks, when you go to the West and you got to play against the Lakers, when you got to play against the Denver Nuggets, those are going to be the games where it's going to be like, okay, you struggled against a zone against some of these weaker bottom feeder teams, but if a team that's literally in your same caliber, that's competing for that Larry O'Brien trophy as well, if they exploit that zone and you cannot find a way to beat it, how's that going to work, not just in the regular season, but of course in the first round, second round, third round, and potentially the finals if you get to that point? That is one of the biggest concerns I have, and that's part of the reason why, as we, at the time of this recording, and maybe this is a topic that you and I can discuss next week, now that it's officially quote-unquote NBA trade season, I think that's going to be the number one attribute that Trajan Langdon and his management is going to have to find a way to try to solve, whether through a trade or whatever the case might be, is try to get another pure shooter on this team. Because I feel like if you pair another pure shooter with Duncan Robinson, along with the playmaking attributes of Cade, along with the playmaking attributes of Asar Thompson, along with the playmaking attributes and shooting of a Jaden Ivey, you're looking at a situation where you're going to force teams not to be able to exploit that zone defense. And then, of course, you have more of an opportunity to win. But until they can find a way to be more of a better shooting, 3-point shooting team, it's going to be a concern that I have about this team.
Yeah, and I just wonder, because the only thing about the trade, deadline coming up in February and things like that, is I wonder who would be the person one moved out. Maybe it's just, a pick or something, since, at the pace they're playing at, it could probably be like a late first, something like that. Or do they have to move players to make the salary work? And if they don't have to move players, who would benefit the least in the rotation, just because they're already playing, at least 10 guys a night, it feels like, and a lot of times more. So does guys like Javonte Green, does his role get reduced all the way altogether, like how Dennis' role has been recently? I think he only played like 3 minutes or something like that yesterday. Or is it someone like does this hurt Ivy or something like that? Not to say, because he's always going to get playing time, but does his minutes even get more reduced, the fact that he's trying to come back and things like that? So that's something I'm going to continue to watch. And another thing about the zone is, when they don't have Cade on the floor, I think that the floor just seems all the way like just more clogged up. I know he hit 6 of 10 threes yesterday, so he was on fire from three. But even when he's not hitting his shot, he's just such a quick decision maker, always making those quick passes. Sometimes as soon as he touches it, it's already leaving his hands, trying to get Tobias Harris or someone like that open on the wing. So I want to see more from that bench unit where they have like a Sar playing the point guard role with Ivy and LeVert, all those ball handlers in there, how that lineup kind of looks against the zone. Because sometimes they can look, I don't know, like a little hesitant to attack the zone, and when their shots aren't falling, it just looks, a little more clogged up in the paint and things like that. And that might be why a guy like Duren, like you said, only had 6 points yesterday. So that's another thing that I'm going to be watching, to close to the trade deadline and things like that.
We shall definitely see, but look, as of right now, whether they're struggling with the zone or not, this team is 21-5, still at the top of the Eastern Conference. They're going to close out, this week of our recording against the Dallas Mavericks, which, by the way, I'm very interested to see that game, because not only do they have Anthony Davis back, but Cooper Flag has been balling since they finally put him in his natural position. I think last night at the top of this recording, he had like career high 41 points or whatever. And then they say he was like the only player in NBA history to have like 40 points at like 18, 19 years old. I'm gonna have to double check that, because I could have sworn LeBron and Melo both had 40-point games as a rookie, but maybe there was 19 or 20. I don't know. But me, that's my bias side, that comes out, when I see stats like that. But look, like, they play against the Dallas Mavericks on Thursday, and then they end the week with a home game, the last home game of 2025 against the Charlotte Hornets. So those are 2 winnable games. And another thing that I want to see in terms of the Pistons, we talking to them about being championship contenders, maybe not more so against the Mavericks, because they have guys on that team that have won championships, who have played meaningful games, and now you have a rising star in Cooper Flag, but even more so for a game against the Charlotte Hornets. And I think this might be another detriment that I've noticed with this team. Don't play down to the level of your competition, and I think that's part of the reason why we saw this team struggle against a Milwaukee Bucks at time. Perfect example, the game that they lost in Milwaukee. Giannis was playing those 3-4 minutes before he went down, they came out balling, they came out swinging. Giannis goes down, they take their foot off the gas. The next thing you know, we talking to a whole bunch of angry players in the locker room post game, because they're trying to figure out how they lost to a Bucks team that didn't have the top 3 player in the league, or whatever the case might be. Same thing with a game like against the Portland Trailblazers. I know the Trailblazers are playing better this year. I think as of right now, if the season ended, they will probably be in the play-in tournament. However, you should take care of business against both of those teams that's towards the end of that's not in your tier. Same thing with the Dallas Mavericks, but of course, like I mentioned, they've been playing better. They have guys that's well established and everything, but they should definitely take care of business this week, and we should be looking at a team by the time we jump on this podcast again that should be 23-5. So we shall see. But that's going to conclude this latest installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Coty M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on all your social media platforms at Coty Davis _24. Once again, it's Coty, COTY DAVIS _24.
And I'm Tarohn Finley. Make sure you guys follow me on all social media platforms at Tarohn Finley, TAROHNFINLEY. Once again, TAROHNFINLEY.
Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.